Our top story, the Twitter revolution. It's beginning to look like the world of social media will soon be acting more in the spirit of the First Amendment than in the spirit of Orwellian censorship. Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter is still fraught with all kinds of technical and financial issues, like whether or not he can ever recoup the $44 billion he's shelling out for the company. But the business of cleaning house of all the censorious bunch who were running Twitter has already begun. The first to go were the top enablers of censorship, the CEO, the CFO, and Vijaya Gadde. She's the head of legal policy, trust, and safety. Now, she was in charge of something called, quote, the civic integrity policy, which was used to censor President Trump and others to, quote, stop the spread of inflammatory content after January 6. But Twitter management's use of political censorship actually began long before that. We all remember Twitter censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story and freezing the account of the New York Post to keep that story from getting out just before the last election. Then there was the campaign against those who questioned virtually any of the often erroneous claims made by the government about vaccines, masks, and other medical procedures during the pandemic. Now, all of these actions were based on a particular editorial view that was often revealed by the censors themselves. Yoel Roth, for example, head of safety and integrity, just tweeted out that despite Elon Musk's takeover, our rules, and this is quoting him, prohibit hateful conduct. This includes targeting people with dehumanizing content and slurs. But this is the same guy who in 2017 called the Trump team, quote, actual Nazis in the White House, end quote. He also likened Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway to Joseph Goebbels. And he said of Trump voters, quote, we fly over those states that voted for a racist tangerine for a reason. Now, those sure sound like slurs to me. I don't know about you, but that doesn't mean that they should be censored, nevertheless. And that's the point. They were only censoring views that they disagreed with, even when those views were based on solid evidence. And now Elon Musk says the days of censorship are over. The Twitter revolution is on. Joining me now is Vivek Ramaswamy, Strive co-founder and executive chairman and author of Nation of Victims. Well, they're all crying out victimhood, those people who are now being fired. How tough is it going to be to clean house there, Vivek?
I think it's going to be pretty difficult because it's not just the top layer. It goes all the way deep down into the organization. But it seems to me that, at least in the early days, Elon Musk appears up to the task. I think the bigger pressure is going to come from advertisers on the outside. There's already rumblings that, you know what, advertisers are going to pull their business from the platform if he reinstates President Donald Trump, as I think is a necessity if you're actually operating it as a free speech platform. But at the same time, I think that's where the business model transition can come in. And if Elon Musk can succeed in ultimately transitioning the business model away from advertisers and towards actually charging the users for the value they get, I think that's going to be his most promising business path to resist the inevitable pressure from advertisers that's coming. And I do think that's a tidal wave that's on its way.
You know, we have seen the top layer get dismissed, the top three people, but you still have this guy, Yoel Roth, there, as far as I know. I mean, something may have happened in the past couple of minutes that changed things. But he's the one who's saying that we got to keep hate speech off. We can't engage in slurs at all. We're going to censor everything. And he's the one who called Kellyanne Conway the equivalent of Joseph Goebbels. I mean, if that's not hate speech, I don't know what is.
So, look, I think there has to be one North Star for what it means to operate Twitter as a free speech platform. And that is no viewpoint-based discrimination, period, full stop, that's it. Hardline standard. There's not going to be any viewpoint discrimination in the platform going forward. Why do I take pains to particularly put a fine point on that? It's because there is some level of content moderation that is necessary for a social media platform to function, or else all you'd have was spam, porn, and so on. Yes, we need to do a better job of cleaning that up. But what the Twitter management in the past years have done is they've conflated that type of content moderation while smuggling in viewpoint discrimination underneath it. And so I think this is Elon Musk's task, is to say that, you know what, it's not that I'm against all content moderation, because technically, literally, the platform can't work without it. But viewpoint discrimination will not be a part of it. And that means that, yes, hate speech as a category goes away, because what you think is hate speech is just someone else's opinion.
That's right.
And if it's bad speech, that's fine. The answer to bad speech is more speech, not less speech. That is the American way, and it should be Twitter's way going forward.
And of course, as it turned out, the speech that they were censoring, for example, during the pandemic, the stuff that the government was coming out with, that was rebuked by a lot of those people that were online. The rebukers were correct. It was the government that was wrong with a lot of the information about the vaccine, saying if you take a vaccine, you'll never get sick. Well, we know that's not true, but that's what some of these tweeters who were being censored were saying.
That's exactly right. And that's what teaches us that free speech is not just some kind of liberal arts luxury, all right? Democracy depends on free speech. Even the pursuit of truth, science itself, depends on free speech. History will teach us that most of our current beliefs will either be proven false or modified in some way, but we only get there, and we get there faster if we're able to debate the ideas in the open. I mean, think about the emerging national consensus now on how disastrous those school lockdown policies were.
Absolutely.
Well, you know what? We might have gotten to those answers more quickly if that hadn't been censored on the internet. I hope that's a lesson we can learn from.
Now, it's a private company, and private companies can do pretty much what they want, but the fact is it was being coordinated. This effort to censor one side of the conversation was being coordinated by people in government. That's what was beginning to make it really scary. And some of those in government, we saw in some of those public hearings in front of Congress, some of the people in Congress were saying it should go further. It should censor speech that was directed towards climate change and suggesting that some of the climate change extremists were wrong, that should also be censored. I mean, they want to go whole hog, and that was the real danger, this coordination between a private company and the government.
Well, I don't want to take credit for this, David, but in January 2021, I wrote in the pages of the Wall Street Journal, along with Jed Rubenfeld, a constitutional law professor, that that's exactly what was happening. People laughed the idea off the stage at the time, but as things have happened over the last year and a half, we've seen that it's actually far worse than we expected. Government is using private parties like Twitter to do through the back door what government could not get done through the front door under the Constitution. And you know what I say is that if it is state action in disguise, then the Constitution still applies. And if the government's going to work hand in glove with a private company to censor political speech, then those companies ought to equally be bound by the same constraint on the federal government. That includes the First Amendment.
And you did see it coming. You saw it coming before it actually happened. A lot of us were worried about that tendency. But it's interesting to note that right now, the first company that's made signs to saying they're not going to be a part of the new Twitter is GM, a company that has so often worked glove in hand with the government in terms of bailouts, et cetera. Isn't that an interesting fact?
It's not a coincidence. I think that at the end of the day, you do have a government agenda that is masquerading in the veneer of private sector activity. And mark my words, that's only going to be the beginning of a tidal wave that is coming. That's why it's incumbent on Elon to make sure that the business model diversifies its revenue streams away from advertisers. That's what it's going to take.
Now, we've been talking a lot about censorship, but it's more than that. There's this shadow banning that's been going on behind the scenes. All kinds of folks at Twitter putting their finger on the scales in order to shadow ban people in ways that might not be obvious. Can that be exposed now?
I think it should be exposed. I hope it is. I mean, the problem, as you said earlier, is there's not just the upper management. There is in the middle of the company what I call deep corporate. It's the analog to what you might call the deep state in government. It's the layer, the managerial class in the middle layer of a company that's actually tilting the scales. And this kind of soft censorship, I think, is even more dangerous than hard censorship, because hard censorship is at least obvious for the public to see and to hold companies accountable for. Soft censorship just means that the algorithms are quietly tamping down and tilting the scales of public discourse with a political agenda. And I think it's that soft censorship that has more of an echo into other spheres of our lives as well. So I hope that he's able to clean house, but it's going to be a very difficult task because of that middle managerial class within the company. So I think it's going to take time.
Well, and I'm going way over now. I'm getting the rap by the producers, but I have to ask, are there enough people that are committed to the First Amendment and to an open marketplace of ideas rather than just a censorious pipeline, that he will be able to do what he needs to do, Elon Musk, by getting the folks who understand the algorithms and understand all of the technical work needed to change things?
I think there are actually. I think there are many people who quietly support that agenda who are afraid to speak up in Silicon Valley, but will quietly vote with their feet. In fact, I know many of them. And I think that I'm optimistic that many of them won't say it publicly, but quietly will be working on this new mission because they believe in it, and it's going to require their work in order to succeed.
And I have the final question, quick answer. Donald Trump, does he get back on or not?
I think he absolutely should be allowed back on. If you were asking me, I would say you should go back on. More free speech and open debate, including with people who disagree with you, is a good thing in this country. Whether he does it or not, that's a business question for him.
Vivek, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Good to see you, my friend. Thanks a lot.